He didn't speak when he lifted her off the floor. He didn't need to. The look in his eyes had already said everything. This wasn't about the contract anymore. Not about duty, or debt, or any name written in ink. This was about need, hunger, control slipping. Her back hit the velvet sheets with a gasp. His hands found hers, pinning them above her head, his breath hot at her ear. "You have no idea what you've done to me." And then he kissed her again. Harder this time. And again. As if stopping would ruin him. That night didn't end once. It ended in pieces, in gasps, in silence so thick it became sacred. If you want more stories that start with fire but burn, slow, leave a like and subscribe. Because sometimes love doesn't ask for permission. It just happens. There was something about the way the kettle whistled that morning. It didn't rush or shriek, just let out a slow, rising sigh like the house itself had exhaled. Vermont had turned cold overnight. Outside the window, a blanket of orange leaves lay motionless on the porch steps. Inside, the warmth from the old cast-iron stove drifted into every corner of the kitchen, curling softly into the folds of my mother's favorite quilt. I poured water over the chamomile and let it steep. Mom was asleep in her rocker, wrapped in the same quilt she used to wrap me in as a girl. She'd dozed off with the radio low, murmuring some old jazz standard. Billie Holiday, maybe. The same songs she'd hum while shelling peas in July or tucking me in during thunderstorms. I never meant to stay this long. I'd left school with the intention of taking a semester off. That was nearly 2 years ago. And now? Now I was 22, managing a quiet life in a house that held too many echoes. My younger brother, Owen, still too small to carry burdens, had no idea how close we were to losing the only home we had left. Medical bills stacked like snowdrifts, quiet calls from creditors, all of it falling, unspoken, on me. That morning, while cleaning out one of Dad's old drawers, the one Mom hadn't touched since the funeral, I found it. A thick, cream-colored envelope. No stamp. No return address. Just one line, handwritten, in calligraphic ink. To Amelia. Open only when your mother needs you most. I held it between my fingers for a long moment, unsure whether to laugh or cry. Dad was gone, buried on a hill just past the apple orchard, and he hadn't written me anything of substance since I was in middle school. A man full of secrets and half-kept promises. Still, the handwriting was his. No doubt about it. I opened the envelope. Inside, a folded letter and a legal contract. The letter was typed and signed by a law firm in New York. The contract was something else. My eyes skimmed the words, at first in disbelief, then with a tightening gut. A marriage agreement. My name printed clearly. The groom, Nathaniel Rhodes. CEO, age 39. Never married. The contract had been signed by my father before his passing. I blinked hard, rereading the fine print. According to the document, my father had made a legal arrangement. Some sort of exchange, of debt forgiveness in return for a future marriage. To this man, someone I had never met. Someone who now, apparently, held the power to collect. At the bottom of the page, a note had been clipped. Medical expenses will be covered in full. No obligation if Amelia declines. That was dated 3 months ago, which was when Mom's hospital bills had suddenly stopped coming. I felt my throat tighten. He'd already done it, paid for everything, quietly, without asking, without even showing his face. Was I part of some noble transaction? Was I being bought? I felt the walls shift a little under me. That was when the doorbell rang. A soft, measured chime. Not the kind that startles. The kind that waits. I moved slowly toward the door, still holding the letter in one hand. Through the glass, I could make out a figure. Tall, still, wearing a long wool coat the color of midnight, one gloved hand in his pocket, the other resting at his side. He stood like someone used to waiting, someone who never had to knock twice. I opened the door. He looked exactly like the kind of man who would have a contract drawn up without saying a word. Sharp cheekbones, storm gray eyes, a presence you could feel before you saw him. "Miss Hart?" he asked. His voice wasn't cold, just deliberate, like each syllable was placed on purpose. I nodded, unable to speak. He offered a slight, practiced bow of the head. "I'm Nathaniel Rhodes. I believe you've read the letter." I gripped the edge of the door frame. He didn't step forward, didn't push, just looked at me in a way that made it hard to breathe. I hated him instantly for that, and hated myself more for noticing the fine lines at the corner of his mouth, the tiredness that sat just behind his eyes. "I didn't agree to anything," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Of course not," he replied, calm. "I'm not here to collect." There was a long pause between us, filled with the crackling of leaves and Billie Holiday still whispering from the kitchen. Then he said something I didn't expect. "I'm here to keep a promise, one your father made, one I never really intended to enforce. Until now." I stared at him, trying to piece it all together. Why now? His gaze flicked briefly toward the kitchen, where my mother lay sleeping under her quilt. "Because she needs you, and whether you believe it or not, she needs me too." And just like that, the door between the past and the future cracked open. I didn't ask him to come in. He didn't ask to be invited. We stood there for what felt like a full minute, just two strangers separated by a screen door. And something heavier I didn't yet have words for. The wind picked up, brushing dried leaves across the porch with a sound like whispering paper. I tightened the shawl around my shoulders. My fingers still gripped the envelope, now soft at the edges from how hard I'd held it. "If you're not here to enforce the contract," I finally said, "why are you here at all?" Nathaniel didn't flinch, didn't smile. He simply looked at me, like someone reading between lines I hadn't written yet. "Because there's more to this than a contract," he said. "And your mother. She once meant something to me. Not what you might think, but something." There it was again. That measured tone, the steady gaze that didn't demand trust, but left you with no good reason to withhold it. I crossed my arms. "So this is charity?" He shook his head. "No. It's responsibility." He reached into his coat, pulled out a small object wrapped in a linen handkerchief, and extended it toward me. "She gave me this when I was 17, asked me to return it when the time was right." I hesitated, then took it. Inside was a silver ring, worn, delicate, engraved with a tiny letter E on the inside. I knew it instantly. My mother had worn it every day until her fingers began to swell from the medication. Then it vanished, and I hadn't thought to ask. "Why did she give this to you?" I asked. Nathaniel glanced past me again, as if through the walls of the house, toward the place where my mother lay asleep. "She once taught me more than books ever could." I was angry, closed off. I didn't speak to anyone at the foster home. She found me a job cleaning up the library after hours, and made me tea before I left each night. The ring was her way of telling me not to forget who I was trying to become. My fingers curled tighter around the ring. I didn't remember him, but I could picture her doing exactly what he said. That was her way. She stitched people back together with kindness, quiet and unnoticed. I stepped aside. "Come in," I said. "You can wait in the front room. I need to check on her." He nodded once, wiped his boots, and stepped in. His coat smelled of cold air and leather. a scent somehow clean and old-fashioned. I led him to the parlor and left him standing there beneath the sepia-toned portraits of my grandparents. It felt strange, watching him in that room, this polished man with shoes that probably cost more than my monthly groceries, just standing, respectful, still. When I came back, he was exactly where I'd left him, hands folded in front of him like he was waiting for judgment. "She's sleeping," I said. She doesn't know you're here." "She will." I stared at him, unsure how much I wanted to unravel. Then I asked the question that had been ticking in my chest like a clock set to explode. "Why me?" He blinked. Once. Slowly. "Your father came to me when the debts were piling up. He wanted to protect your mother, but he knew he didn't have long. He remembered me from years ago, and he asked me for help, not as a businessman, as a man who owed your mother a debt he could never repay." "And the marriage?" I asked, each word thick in my throat. "That wasn't my idea. I offered to take care of the medical costs anonymously. But he said you'd never accept help unless it looked like obligation." I nearly laughed. Soft, bitter. That sounded like my father. Proud to a fault, always negotiating dignity like it was. "Currency, so you agreed?" Nathaniel looked down for the first time. I didn't say yes at first. In fact, I said no, until I read a letter your mother had written him. I tensed. "What letter?" He reached into his coat again, slower this time, and pulled out a folded page, creased at the corners, but clean. He didn't offer it to me, just held it in his palm. "I won't give it to you," he said. "Not yet. It wasn't meant for your eyes. But I'll tell you this. She asked for nothing. She only asked that if you ever needed someone steady, someone who wouldn't leave, that I not turn away." The room felt smaller. I looked down at the ring in my hand, then back at him. "And you think a ring and a contract make you that someone?" His expression didn't change. "No, but I'm here anyway." And somehow, that landed heavier than any vow. We sat in silence after that, the kind of silence that only exists between two people whose lives are touching at the edges, but not yet joined. After a long moment, he stood. "I'll be staying in town for a few days," he said. "I have business. But if you'd like to speak again, I'll be at the inn on Hawthorne Street." He reached the door but paused before opening it. "And Amelia?" he said over his shoulder. I looked up. "You don't owe me anything. But you should read the rest of the contract before you decide." "Why?" "Because I signed it too, but not for the reasons you think." And with that, he was gone. Just the sound of leaves scraping along the porch, and the kettle, still whistling, from a stove I hadn't turned off. The courthouse was quiet that morning. Just the ticking of the wall clock, the shuffle of papers behind the clerk's desk, and the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Wore a dress that used to be my mother's. Soft blue cotton, fitted at the waist, the hem falling just below my knees. She'd worn it to her sister's wedding, I think. Or maybe to that teacher's dinner where they gave her an award for quiet excellence. An award she never mentioned, but kept the certificate tucked in a drawer. There were no flowers, no guests, no music. Nathaniel wore gray. A suit so sharply, tailored it looked out of place in this small-town building where the paint peeled near the floorboards, and the judge wore scuffed shoes. He held a pen like a surgeon, steady, precise, as he signed the certificate. I signed next. No ring. Just ink. It felt more like the closing of a contract than the opening of a life. "That's it," the clerk said, stamping the last page. "You're legally husband and wife." The judge, an older woman with kind eyes, glanced between us. She looked like she wanted to say something comforting, but couldn't quite find the words. I didn't blame her. Nathaniel thanked her with a nod, then turned to me. "Would you like to get breakfast?" It was the first thing he'd said since we arrived. I shook my head. "No, I should get home. My mother has a checkup today." He didn't press. He simply walked me to the car, a black sedan with seats that smelled faintly of leather and cedar. He held the door open, waited until I settled in, then closed it with a softness I didn't expect. He didn't drive me home. Instead, he handed me an envelope. "Your mother's medical care is paid through the next year," he said. "And I've made arrangements for Owen's schooling, if you'll allow it." "You didn't have to do that," I said. "No," he replied, "but I did." His voice gave nothing away. The ride was silent, not tense, not awkward, just quiet, like two people sitting in the waiting room of their own lives. When we pulled up in front of the house, I hesitated. "So what now?" I asked. He turned off the engine but didn't look at me. "Now we let the paperwork settle. I won't interfere in your life unless asked. But if you need anything, you call." I nodded. "You don't have to stay in town, do you?" I asked. "No," he said. "But I will. A while longer." I opened the door and stepped out, wind catching the hem of my dress. Then I turned back. "I'm sorry it had to be this way," I said, "that it was all arranged." He met my gaze, and something flickered behind his eyes. "So am I," he said, "but I'm not sorry I kept the promise." Then he drove off. I stood on the porch a long time after that. The house looked the same, but something had shifted. Not outside. In me. There was a silence in my chest that didn't feel empty. It felt expectant, like a hallway waiting to be walked. Inside, my mother was sitting at the kitchen table, her thin hands wrapped around a cup of ginger tea. She looked up and smiled, a smile so soft it almost broke me. "It's done?" she asked. I nodded. She reached for my hand. Her fingers were cool and dry, and when she squeezed, it wasn't for reassurance. It was gratitude. "He was always good," she said, "even when no one saw it." "Why him?" I asked, barely above a whisper. "Because you need someone who won't run when things get hard." I didn't answer. Not then. That night, after Owen went to bed and Mom fell asleep to the hum of her old radio, I sat at the kitchen table alone. The moon spilled a soft light through the window. I still wore the blue dress. I opened the contract again. There were no hidden clauses, no catches. Just one line, handwritten at the bottom, beneath Nathaniel's signature. "This agreement binds no hearts, but mine is already spoken for." I didn't know what to do with that. Didn't know if it was a line meant to ease my discomfort, or if it was truth cloaked in formality. I folded the paper slowly, smoothed the creases, and tucked it into the drawer with the unpaid bills. And then, because I didn't know what else to do, I made a pot of tea. Nathaniel came back 2 days later. He knocked, waited, and when I opened the door, he simply said, "I've rented the guest house down by the lake. Close enough to be near, far enough not to intrude." I didn't invite him in. He didn't expect me to. But before he turned to leave, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a slim, wrapped package. "A gift," he said. "From someone who doesn't like gifts." I unwrapped it after he left. It was a book of poetry, dog-eared, with notes in the margins. My mother's name written inside the cover in familiar, looping script. He'd kept it all these years. I stared at the inscription for a long time. Then I ran my fingers over the page and whispered to no one. "What are you not saying, Nathaniel?" "Roads?" It was the kind of night Vermont rarely offered in late October. No frost, no wind, just a stillness so deep the trees outside seemed to be holding their breath. Mom had gone to bed early, the way she did now when her strength ran out. By dinner time, Owen was curled up in his blanket fort beside the fireplace, the soft sound of his breathing in rhythm with the creak of the house settling in. I couldn't sleep. I paced the kitchen for a while, folding and refolding the same dish towel, as if the fabric might somehow tell me what to do with the things I hadn't said. The house was quiet, but my thoughts were loud. Every unanswered question, every uneasy breath between Nathaniel and me since that courthouse morning. I poured a mug of chamomile and stepped out onto the back porch. The night smelled of damp leaves and firewood. The lake beyond the trees reflected the stars like someone had scattered silver across black glass. It was beautiful, and impossibly lonely. That was when I saw him. Nathaniel stood near the fence, just on the edge of the woods. No coat this time. Just a dark sweater, sleeves pushed up, hands in his pockets. I didn't call out. Just stepped down the porch steps, one at a time, my mug warming my hands. He turned when I was a few feet away, not startled, as if he'd sensed me before I even moved. "You couldn't sleep either," I said. "No," he answered. "Didn't think I'd see you tonight." "Me neither." We stood there a moment, the space between us filled with everything we hadn't said. No demands, no expectations, only stillness. "Why the lake?" I asked softly. He tilted his head toward the dark water. "It's quiet. It reminds me that still things can be deep." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. Instead, I handed him the mug. He took it, hands brushing mine, warm from the ceramic. And for a second, just a heartbeat, we didn't move. "Chamomile?" he guessed. "Always." I smiled. He took a sip, then passed it back. No words, no compliments. Just a sharing of small warmth. I found myself sitting on the wooden bench near the fence. He sat beside me. Not close, but not far. Enough space to breathe. Enough not to feel alone. "Did you mean what you wrote on the contract?" I asked suddenly, not turning to look at him. He didn't pretend not to know what I meant. "Yes." A long pause. "But how could you know?" I whispered. "You barely knew me." His voice was low. "I didn't have to. Sometimes, it's not about knowing the person. It's about recognizing the place they leave in you." I turned to look at him. "That's not something most people say," I said. He gave the ghost of a smile. "That's because most people don't think in silence." I laughed, softly, unexpectedly. "You're hard to read," I admitted. "So are you," he said. "But I try." We sat there for a long time after that, talking in small pieces, or not talking at all. He told me about the first time he'd met my mother, how she'd handed him a mug of tea and said, "It's okay to be angry. Just don't stay there." He told me how that night, she made him alphabetize books until his hands stopped shaking. "She was good at seeing people," I said. "She still is," he replied. "And she always said you saw even more." I looked down at my hands. "I don't feel like I see anything clearly right now." "That's okay. Sometimes it's enough just to be seen." I swallowed hard. He was watching me. I could feel it. Not staring, not studying, but witnessing. And it was the gentlest thing anyone had done for me in a very long time. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled something out. A key. Simple. Unmarked. "To the house down by the lake," he said. "For you. In case you ever want a place where no one expects anything." I didn't take it at first. "What if I don't want to be alone?" I asked. He looked at me for a long time, then softly, Then you don't have to be. And he sat, the key on the bench between us, not offering it like a deal, just leaving it there, like a choice. When we stood to leave, I brushed past him, barely, and felt the lightest touch of his hand on my back. Not guiding, just there. A presence, not a push. We didn't say goodnight, didn't need to. I climbed the porch steps and paused at the door. He turned back once just before disappearing down the path. "Thank you for the tea," he said. "Thank you for coming back," I replied. Then I went inside, and for the first night in months, I slept through until morning. The first snowfall came earlier than expected that year. It began as a whisper, just a soft fluttering against the windows. By afternoon, the front lawn was covered in white. Clean, undisturbed. The kind of snow that makes everything look new, even when it isn't. Mom had a better day. She made it to the kitchen with her cane and insisted on slicing apples for pie, even though her hands trembled, and I had to catch the knife twice before it slipped. I let her do it anyway. Because there was a kind of dignity in the way she stood there at the counter, wrapped in her faded cardigan, humming under her breath. Each motion slow but deliberate, a quiet act of defiance against the erosion of her body. The song she was humming. I hadn't heard it in years. It stopped me cold. "You used to sing that when I was little," I said, watching her tie the pie crust like she was braiding memories into dough. She looked up, startled. "Did I?" "Almost every night, especially when Dad was away." She smiled faintly. "Funny. I didn't think you remembered that. I remember everything." That wasn't quite true, but I remembered enough. I remembered the way her voice always wavered on the same note, how she'd hum instead of sing when she thought we were asleep. I never knew the words, just the tune. That night, after she'd gone to bed and Owen had fallen asleep on the couch with cinnamon on his cheeks, I found myself wandering into the guest room, the one with her old things. I hadn't gone through it since she got sick. She'd always said it wasn't time yet, that some boxes should stay closed until the heart was ready to open them. I wasn't sure mine was ready, but my hands moved anyway. There, in the bottom drawer of the old roll-top desk, beneath a stack of winter scarves and a tin of broken buttons, I found a wooden box, unmarked, unlocked. Inside, letters. Dozens of them. Some in my father's handwriting, some in hers, and one, tucked into the very bottom, written on thin, yellowing paper in tight, neat script. "To Nathaniel," the envelope said. "Only if she ever asks." I sat back on the carpet and held the envelope like it was breathing. It wasn't sealed. Inside was a single page. She'd written it years ago, before I was even in high school, before Dad died, before any of us knew what would come. "Dear Nathaniel," it began. "You won't remember me the way I remember you, and that's how it should be. You were a boy trying to disappear, and I was a teacher trying to remind you the world hadn't given up. We met for only a season, but I never forgot the way you listened without ever asking for anything. Or how you once told me that silence was easier than hope." My throat tightened. This isn't a letter of guilt. I owe you no apology. But I owe you a truth. I never told Amelia about you, not because I was ashamed, but because the world never gave us a reason to cross paths. Again, if one day you find her, and if she asks you why, tell her this. I asked you to protect her not because you owed me, but because you saw her, even before I did. The last line was written differently, a bit shakier, as if her hand had trembled as she finished. "She is not yours by blood, nor by promise, but if you choose to stand beside her, let it be by choice, not by contract. Let it be because you saw in her what I always knew she would become. Strong, stubborn, and infinitely worth loving, I folded the letter slowly, hands trembling. No blood. No promise. Just choice. And he'd stayed. The next day, I walked down to the lake. The snow hadn't stuck much here, just dusted the roof of the guest house and made the porch steps slick. He was outside, stacking firewood. His sleeves were rolled, breath fogging slightly in the cold. He didn't look surprised when he saw me. I held out the letter. "You knew I'd find it," I said. He wiped his hands on his jeans, looked down at the envelope, then back at me. "I hoped you would. When you were ready. You didn't have to stay. I know. But you did." I did. We stood in silence, the kind that no longer felt heavy, but safe. "You weren't her student," I said quietly. "You were someone who needed saving." "And she did," he replied. He motioned toward the porch swing. We sat, close enough to feel each other's warmth. "She told me once," he said, "that people don't fall in love all at once. They fall in inches, over cups of tea, over small kindnesses, over the way someone chooses to stay." I looked at him. "Do you think she was right?" "I think I've been falling for a long time." There it was. No grand declaration, no urgency, just truth. I didn't reach for his hand. He didn't reach for mine. But something passed between us. Quiet, binding, and real. The kind of moment you don't notice until you realize you've already changed. That night, I made tea. 1 cup. Then I walked outside and placed it on the porch of the guest house, steam rising into the dark. I didn't knock, didn't wait. But when I turned to walk back up the hill, I heard the door open behind me. And the sound of footsteps, slow and certain, in the snow. New York was colder than I remembered. Not the kind of cold that stings your skin, but the kind that slips into your coat sleeves and lingers beneath your collar. It had been years since I'd visited, before my father's debts, before the slow unraveling of our family. Back then, the city had seemed like another planet. Now it just felt quiet, almost ordinary. Nathaniel met me at the station with his usual understatement. No coat too fine, no driver. Just himself and 2 cups of coffee in gloved hands. "You didn't have to come all the way to the platform," I said. "I didn't have to offer cream either," he replied. "But here we are." The coffee was hot, slightly bitter. I liked that he remembered I didn't take sugar. He didn't ask me why I came. I didn't offer. But we both knew it was more than curiosity, more than politeness. It had been a week since the letter. A week since the air between us shifted, not with thunder but with the steady pull of gravity. Each word now carried a different weight. Each glance held a question we hadn't answered, but hadn't walked away from either. "Where are we going?" I asked. "Somewhere I haven't been in a long time," he said. He didn't elaborate. We walked through the city streets, past bookstores tucked between high-rises, bakeries with fogged windows, and dogs wearing better coats than I owned. I noticed the way he glanced up at certain buildings like they used to mean something. Like they still might. Eventually, we turned down a quiet street, Hawthorne. The buildings here were older, brick and ivy and wrought iron railings. Nothing shiny, nothing loud, just a kind of settled beauty. And at the end of the block, a storefront with a faded wooden sign, the Hawthorne Reading Room. He held the door for me. A small bell jingled overhead. Inside, the space was warm and inviting. Shelves lined with books, not arranged by genre or author, but by feeling. For rainy days, for mending, for letting go. A few chairs, a fireplace, a kettle steaming behind a small counter. It smelled like paper and cedar and lemon tea. "What is this place?" I whispered. "Mine," he said. I turned, startled. You own this? I built it, he corrected. He walked over to the fireplace, stoked the embers. After I stepped down from the board last year, I needed something different. So I bought this building and made a place I'd want to be in, even if no one else ever came. But people do come, I said, noticing the guest book on the table, pages worn and full. They do now. Sometimes they sit. Sometimes they just listen. I ran my fingers along the spines of a shelf labeled, "For Forgiveness." Why did you bring me here? He turned, looked at me, not intensely but fully. Because this is the only thing I've ever built that wasn't about success or strategy. It's about stillness. And I thought maybe you needed a place that didn't ask anything of you. I felt my throat tighten. You keep doing that, I said softly. Doing what? Offering me quiet things, when the world always asks so loud. He gave the gentlest smile. I think you've had enough noise. We spent the afternoon there. He brewed tea behind the counter and let me explore. I found a poem taped to the inside of the bathroom door, handwritten, untitled. Love is not the fire that consumes. It's the hand that holds the match unlit, waiting until you are ready to warm yourself by it. I didn't ask if it was his. I didn't need to. That evening, we ate dinner at a small place nearby. Nothing fancy, just soup and bread and quiet conversation. When we stepped outside, snow had begun to fall again. Slow. Soft, turning the city into a postcard. I tilted my head back and let the flakes land on my cheeks. Do you miss it? I asked. The boardroom? The deals? He shook his head. No. I missed the part of me that thought those things would fill something. And now? Now I build smaller things, and try not to ask them to fix me. I looked at him, the man, who had once signed a marriage contract with a stranger, and now gave me space instead of pressure. Stillness instead of promises. Do you think this thing between us is one of those small things? I asked. He paused. Snow clung to his eyelashes. No, he said. I think it's the only thing I'm afraid to name. Because once I do, I don't know if I can be casual about it anymore. I didn't answer. I stepped closer, brushing snow from the lapel of his coat. His breath caught, just slightly. Then I took his gloved hand in mine. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to. Later, as he walked me back to the inn where I was staying, he paused outside the door. You'll come back to Vermont? Yes, I said. But not because I have to. Good, he replied. Because I don't want to be another weight. I want to be something you choose. I leaned in, pressing my forehead briefly to his shoulder. You already are, and for the first time since we married, I meant it. The porch light was on when I got home. It was a small thing, maybe, but it meant something. Nathaniel had left that light on every night since returning from New York, never asking when I'd come home, never questioning why I'd needed space. Just leaving it there. A quiet signal that said, "You're not alone. Not anymore." The air smelled like cinnamon and wood smoke. Someone had been baking. I stepped inside and was greeted by the warmth of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not perfection. Not absence of worry. Just peace. The kind that grows slowly, like ivy, wrapping around the walls of the heart. Nathaniel was in the kitchen. No suit. No pretense. Just a flannel shirt rolled to the elbows, flour on his knuckles, and a pie crust that had clearly been through a battle. He looked up, startled. You're early. You're baking. That's not what I'd call it, he said, eyeing the misshapen pastry. I was trying to recreate your mother's apple pie. It fought back. I laughed, more with my eyes than my mouth. She never measured anything. She said real pie comes from instinct. He smiled. Then mine came from desperation. I dropped my bag by the stairs and joined him at the counter. For a while, we stood shoulder to shoulder, elbows brushing. No music, no clatter. Just the soft rhythm of knives slicing apples, the occasional creak of floorboards, and our quiet togetherness. I thought about how strange it was that comfort could feel this new, and this inevitable. You used to be so careful, I said. I still am. But not with me. Not anymore. He looked at me, not questioning, just waiting. It's like you stopped trying to protect me from the weight of you, I continued, and started trusting that maybe I could carry some of it. I never wanted to burden you, but love doesn't work without weight, Nathaniel. It's not weightless. It's just shared. He didn't answer for a moment. Then he said, so quietly I almost missed it. I've never let anyone carry me. I reached over, brushing flour from his wrist. Then you've never really been loved. His breath caught, and for a second, I thought he might step away, but instead, he closed his eyes. I've spent most of my life thinking love was something people survived, not something they wanted. And now I think maybe it's something you stay for, even when it's quiet, even when it's messy. That night, after we'd burned the pie and ended up eating toast instead, we sat on the porch. The stars were out, crisp and clear. The kind of night where the silence wraps around you not like a shroud, but like a shawl. I pulled my knees to my chest, balancing my tea on the arm of the chair. Nathaniel sat beside me, his hand resting just close enough that I could reach for it, and I did. No drama, no rush, just the soft certainty of skin brushing skin, like the last note of a familiar song. Can I ask you something? I said. Anything. Why did you never say it? He knew what I meant. He looked down at our joined hands, as if gathering words from the lines of my palm, because people use those words like bandages, like saying them will fix the breaking, and I didn't want to say them until I could mean them like shelter. And now? He looked at me then, full, clear. Now I mean them like home. I didn't speak. I just leaned over and rested my head on his shoulder, listening to the steady rhythm of his breath. My mother used to say, I whispered, that love wasn't the grand gesture. It was the porch light you left on for someone, even when you didn't know if they'd come back. She was right, he said. You're my porch light, I whispered. And in that moment, I knew. I wasn't afraid anymore. Later that night, as we got ready for bed, our first night in the same room, not out of convenience but choice, he stood behind me at the mirror. He didn't undress me. He didn't press. He just placed his hands on my shoulders and whispered, You don't have to be ready for everything. Just ready for this moment. I nodded, eyes meeting his in the mirror. I am. And when we lay down together, it wasn't about filling space or making promises. It was about being still and choosing not to sleep alone anymore. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of a record playing low in the kitchen. Nathaniel had made pancakes. They were terrible, but he grinned when I took the first bite. You stayed, he said, not like a statement. Like a prayer answered. You made it easy, I replied. And I meant every word. Spring came late to Vermont that year. The snow melted slowly, revealing patches of yellow grass and crocuses pushing through soil like small miracles. The trees, still bare, shook off winter in hushed creaks. Even the air seemed to hesitate, caught between frost and bloom. Life didn't change all at once. Mom still had her slow days, where she slept through breakfast and ate dinner in silence. Owen still asked questions I didn't always have answers to, about Dad, about the word widow, about why some things break even when you try to hold them carefully. But some things did change. Nathaniel moved into the house. Not with boxes or declarations. He brought only a duffel bag, a small stack of books, and a mug he refused to let anyone else use. He took the guest room at first, said it was practical. But within a week, I found his watch on my nightstand, and his coat draped over the chair where I used to leave mine. He didn't move in. He merged, quietly, gently, like weather turning warmer. We never threw a second wedding. There were no announcements, no photos, just days folded into each other like laundry, ordinary and shared. And then one morning, he did something I never expected. He asked me to walk with him to the orchard. It was just past sunrise. Mist clung to the grass, and the path was soft with thawing mud. We wore boots and old jackets, and my fingers were still curled around a steaming cup of tea. He didn't speak until we reached the tree line. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I wrote this," he said, "the night after you gave me the letter. I never sent it, but I think you should hear it." I didn't reach for the paper. Instead, I nodded. He unfolded it slowly, like he was still deciding whether the words were good enough to speak aloud. "Dear Amelia," he began, voice steady but low. "I've never believed in fate. I believed in logic, in systems, in cost and return. But nothing about you fits a system, and nothing about the way I feel has ever felt logical. You asked me once why I never said I loved you. It's because I was trying to build a love that didn't need to be said to be true. But now, I want to say it. Not because I need you to hear it, because I need to finally let it live outside my chest. I love you. Not because of a contract, not because of a promise to someone else, but because every day with you feels like the only part of my life that doesn't feel borrowed. If you choose to leave someday, I will understand. But if you choose to stay, then I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret it." He folded the paper again and looked up. My eyes were full. But I didn't cry. Instead, I stepped forward and reached for his hand. "I already stayed," I whispered. "This just means I'll stop waiting for the ground to fall out from under me." He kissed the top of my head, not with urgency, but with the kind of care that comes only after you've decided someone is your home. We planted a sapling in the orchard that day, a single apple tree, at the edge of the hill where the sun touched. First in the morning. We named it Elise, after my mother, even though she was still alive, because, as Owen said, some people deserve to be remembered while they can still hear it. Nathaniel built a bench beside it. Sometimes we sit there and don't speak for half an hour. Sometimes we talk about nothing, about soup recipes or wind patterns or which bird has been stealing seeds from the feeder. Sometimes we just hold hands. My mother passed a few months later, peacefully, in her sleep. The window was cracked open, and I like to believe the last thing she heard was the wind moving through the trees she loved. After the service, Nathaniel held my hand the whole time. Not tightly. Just enough to remind me that I didn't have to stand alone. He didn't offer speeches or solutions. He just stayed. And in the weeks that followed, he cleaned out her room with me, one drawer at a time. He found her recipe cards, her old cassette tapes, a photo of her as a girl standing beside a younger version of himself. We didn't speak of it. We didn't need to. The day we finally redid our vows, it was just the two of us, in the backyard. In our boots, with coffee mugs instead of champagne. I wore a sundress. He wore a flannel shirt, and that look he gets when he's trying not to smile too much. We said our vows without paper this time. He went first. I don't vow to love you like a fire. I vow to love you like the porch light, always on, whether you notice or not. I vow to listen to the quiet things, the sighs, the pauses, the weight of your silence. And I vow to stay, even when the staying is quiet and ordinary. Then it was my turn. I don't vow to make your life easier. I vow to be the hand that helps you hold it. I vow to believe in your softness, even when the world rewards your hardness. And I vow to remember that love doesn't always knock. Sometimes it just waits on the porch until you open the door. He kissed me, slow and steady. The wind picked up, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like the world wasn't moving past me. It was moving with me. Some nights, we still sleep with the window open. Sometimes I wake to the sound of his breathing. Sometimes he wakes to the sound of mine. We don't always talk about the past, but when we do it gently. Because some stories don't need to be rewritten. They just need to be sat beside. If this story touched something quiet in you, if it reminded you of someone you miss, or someone you've chosen to stay beside, don't forget to leave a like. And if you'd like more stories like this, told with heart and honesty, make sure to subscribe. We'd love to have you here next time too.